to Exeter Labour Party's second virtual question and answer session. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to give a warm welcome to Ben Bradshaw, Exeter Labour MP since 1997. Welcome, Ben. And Phil Bialyk, Exeter City Council leader. And apologies once again, Rob Hannaford is having some difficulties in accessing the IT this morning. Rob's the leader of the Labour group on Devon County Council, and he may hopefully join us at some point in the next hour. So once again, Phil and Ben and indeed Rob have given reports recently, which hopefully people would have been able to read on the Labour Party blog. So we're going to go straight into questions this morning. Thank you everyone for submitting all the questions that you have done. We've had once again a tremendous number. Unfortunately, there's not time to cover all of the questions in the hour that we have today, but what we have done is try to bring them together on some key subject areas. And I hope the spirit of the vast majority of questions are covered in that. I'll address each of the questions to either Ben or Phil, and then the other may want to add some comments afterwards. I would remind Ben and Phil that we only have an hour, so to keep your answers succinct, and I will hurry you along if necessary so we can keep to time and ensure the questions are answered. Okay? Okay, so the first question, or the first subject for this morning is the COVID crisis, unsurprisingly. And we've got a number of questions on this, Ben, so and I think you'll want to come in on these. So the first question, and this is very topical, so I took a bit of license and allowed this one in this morning. And this is from Steve Aves in Newtown St Leonard's. Scientific advisors who broke lockdown rules were forced by the government to resign. This special advisors, such as Dominic Cummings, who broke the government's own lockdown rules, do not resign. Does this not show that the Tory government holds scientists and the British public in contempt? And then we've got a number of further questions. So Phil Chadwick from Exwick has got a question around the 14-day quarantine period and wondered what your view is on that. We've also got a question from Ali in Durryard St James, who asks about free internet access. And now it's essential because schools, colleges and university lessons are being taught, but also to make it financially viable for everyone in the country. And then Deborah from Alphington, I just want to say thank you, Deborah, for your question, and thank you for all of your work in the NHS and supporting us through this crisis. And Deborah asks, please can Ben talk to the government, will foreign holidays be able to take place this year? At the moment, there is not definite information for many people, including myself, being asked to pay the final balance for holidays. I am an NHS worker and I'd just like clarification if I will have a holiday this year. You definitely deserve one, Deborah. And the final question on this is from Linda Carter in St Thomas. Lyndon, I certainly sympathise with your question, and I think many of us will. Lyndon says, I find it difficult to envisage when, in the absence of a vaccine, it will be acceptably safe to return to anything resembling normality. Do the panel have any indication of the criteria to be applied in which it would be considered safe to go about normal activities again? So sorry, Ben, we had lots of questions on this. I condensed those as far as I could.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Hannah, for those. I mean, let me start with Cummings, because that's obviously the hot news today, and things are changing and developing all the time. I noticed just before coming on the call that Number 10 seemed to have changed their story overnight. I mean, look, he's clearly broken the rules, but you know, he should resign. But of course he won't, because these people, Cummings, Johnson, the rest of these people who ran the Leave campaign and now running the country, think there's one law for them and another law for the rest of us. Obviously, we know we'll keep the pressure up, and I'm sure the media will as well. But you're absolutely right, Steve. You know that when the Deputy Chief Medical Officer of Scotland and Neil Ferguson have to resign because what you could argue were far less serious transgressions, he should go. But whether or not he will is another matter. Phil and Deborah's questions are kind of slightly related. Phil on quarantine, Deborah on foreign holidays. Look, I've stuck my neck out on this. I think this quarantine plan is absolutely stupid. If there was going to be a quarantine, or if there's an argument for a quarantine, there would have been one at the beginning of this pandemic when we had very low infection rates. And indeed, we did have a quarantine temporarily against arrivals from Wuhan and northern Italy, one or two other high-risk countries at the beginning of the pandemic, but that was scrapped in mid-March, and we just had a free-for-all since then. But the idea of us having a quarantine now, just as the whole of the rest of Europe are opening up, Italy's opening its borders to fellow Europeans on June the 3rd, the rest of Europe's following in the rest of June, just at the time when we're imposing a quarantine, just doesn't make sense in my view, because we have the highest infection rates in Europe now. So we'd be in fact stopping holidaymakers or others from Greece and Portugal with very low rates coming here. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, it's very rarely I agree with David Davis, the Tory politician, but he was on the World at One yesterday saying there's a stronger case for quarantine arrivals from York at King's Cross Station than there is in quarantining arrivals from low-risk countries. I suspect this policy will unravel in the same way as so many of their other policies has unraveled, and it won't be enforced for very long, which leads me on to Deborah's question about a holiday. I mean, I think it was looking quite hopeful for a foreign holiday this year, I think, for people, and the airlines and the travel industry were set to restart from mid-June. But this quarantine proposal has thrown a spanner in the works, as well as course of threatening thousands and thousands of jobs in a vital industry. So I hope you'll still be able to have a foreign holiday this year. I certainly intend to have one, but it'll depend on whether this silly quarantine idea survives, which I hope it won't. On Ali's question about Wi-Fi, I mean, this was actually a manifesto commitment we had, if you remember, in last December's election. And it took quite a lot of criticism and ridicule at the time, kind of free Wi-Fi for everyone. But I wonder if that is something a bit like the new normal, that the COVID pandemic might have changed, and there might be more support across the political spectrum for that, not least because I think people are really beginning to realise, especially in connection with the whole schools issue, that one of the problems with the schools not operating fully at the moment is it's the most vulnerable and the least well-off children who are suffering the most, and partly because they have less, or in some cases no, access to broadband. So yes, I mean, I think that is a policy whose time may have come, if a little bit too late for us in terms of the election. Was there another question on the new? Oh, the VAT. Yeah. Oh, Linda, this is a huge question about what the new normal is going to look like. Look, I mean, I think we all hope there will be a vaccine, but there might not. There's not a vaccine for HIV. People thought there would be, but there's a treatment for it now, which means people survive and so forth. So I don't think we should put all our eggs in one basket of a vaccine. If there's a vaccine, fantastic. But alternatively, you could have a treatment. There's some quite encouraging signs from Italy where they've done blood antibody treatment using blood from infected parents to recovered patients to treat infected patients, which have had very good rates. So it could be a treatment, it could be a vaccine. It could also be that the virus loses its virulence. I mean, that's what viruses often do. I think there's still so much uncertainty about this, but I think what is clear is that, the new normal is going to be changing all the time. It's going to be very gradual, and it's not going to be like the old normal until we either do find a vaccine, a treatment, or the virus just peters out.
Thank you, Ben. Phil, did you have a comment?
Yes, very quickly. I could sum most of that up from my perspective of this government as too little, too late. And once again, I know this all sounds jingoistic, but it's one rule for them and one rule for us. Do as we say, not as we do. I think Ben's right. As for holidays, we intend to most probably go out on our bikes later on. We'll most probably cycle down the Extends estuary. and perhaps put our heads somewhere that we could be on the Mediterranean coast if it's nice and sunshine. So that's how I try to find a little relief around here, because there are some beautiful places in and around Exeter, and also on the Wi-Fi. Ben, if that does come about, I'm going to put Rob Hannaford's name forward to be the first to be connected. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I'm sure Rob would welcome that. Okay, so the next question then is on recovery and recovery after the coronavirus crisis, and linking in to Lyndon's question. So Sarah Gibbs from Durryard and St James asks, do you think we can restart our local economy in a way that preserves public health whilst forging a more sustainable and equitable future? What ideas do you have for ensuring the most vulnerable in Exeter are considered in all plans that are made to recover from the effects of this pandemic? So Phil, I know that the City Council's been doing a lot of work on a recovery plan. And just before I bring you in, Ben Megan had a question about the hoardings around the Clarence site. So I don't know if you just want to encompass that as well.
Yes, the Clarence was mentioned last time. Clearly they have a license to be out there. Clearly nothing is going to happen. And I can assure you that I shall be asking the officers that that license needs to be withdrawn, and they need to tidy up that mess at the front of the Clarence whilst they make their minds up. That is the situation, and I undertake to do that. Hopefully I can report back soon on that. On the recovery, myself, the officers, and also the portfolio holder team of the City Council have now started to work on the recovery plan. For those of you who get a few moments, you can visit the council website. The papers for Tuesday week's executive meeting are out, and we've got papers on the recovery plan and what we're doing as the council. We have to remember all our relationships in all of this, because obviously government will be doing a plan. We have what we call the local enterprise partnership will be doing a plan. County Council are doing a plan. It's a real Russian doll of plans and of where all these plans sit. The City Council, what we are doing is in two bits. One, what we have to do as a local authority, and two, how we can work with other agencies and employers in the city to start to kickstart. As you know, we have been given money by government to support businesses with business grants, and we've got rid of most of that money, or got rid or used it. Business rate grants as well, and business supports. You might have heard on the radio this morning some issues in relation to rents and some of the problems. We are a major landlord to commercial businesses in the city centre, and I'm dealing with that now with our corporate property team on how we take that view forward. My view is we cannot be pushing people at this stage, because we would just basically push them under, and that would not serve the city at all. However, that comes as a cost. So internally, I've got to say this, Chair, we've had so far an additional £1.2 million worth of expenditure over the next year. Up until the end of the financial year, we are predicting 9.2 million of losses. We have had 1.3 million support from the central government, and we've managed to furlough staff in the council, and that will give us in-year savings of £400,000. And before I get too many emails about the furlough staff, I can assure you, we worked with the trade unions, Unison, on furloughing staff, and all of our furloughed staff are receiving 100% of their wages. We have topped it up. So there is no employee employed by the City Council losing any money at all. I want to make that perfectly clear. It's been done by agreement with the unions and each individual. So our plan is very important on how we bring it forward. Please read that document, everybody. I think it's quite important. We are working with what we call the Place Board. This has agencies like the Met Office, even the Chief Constable on that, Exeter College, Exeter University, the Chamber of Commerce we're working with, major businesses, the Managing Director of Great Western, the Managing Director of Stagecoach. we need to bring forward a package of recovery proposals, which we are doing. The paper that will appear on the council website is just the start. It will not provide all the answers at this stage, but I can assure people out there that we need a Labour authority in place to help support and facilitate the recovery for people in Exeter. That's what my Labour group is really passionate about doing, and that's what we intend to do. And we want to bring about our manifesto that we've resubmitted onto our website quite recently. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. Ben, did you want to come in on this?
Just very briefly on the public health part of the question, I think, if anything, if this pandemic has exposed anything, it's exposed the really deep health inequalities that we suffer as a country. Not only if you look at the sort of the disproportionate mortality rate among low-income families and ethnic minorities. And we've known for some time that health inequalities in the UK have been growing since 2010, since Labour lost power. That for the first time for decades, life expectancy has been falling among the poorest. So, and the other thing, of course, is in which people may not be aware of, is that when the Tories brought in the Lansley reforms, they completely fragmented the whole public health landscape. So public health was taken away from health and given to local government, which some argue was a sensible thing to do. But its resources have been cut every single year for the last 10 years. The government can claim to have protected spending on the NHS in absolute terms, although not in real terms, but public health spending has been cut year on year. So, I think one of the things that the inevitable public inquiry will have to look into when all this is over is a better public health system and infrastructure. And just one example, the other element which I forgot to mention in response in my answer to Linda about how we kind of live in the new normal, is that one thing that's clearly going to be essential is a proper local test, trace and isolate system, which the Prime Minister has now been forced to promise by June the 1st by Keir Starmer at PMQs this week. People in the public health and local government officials in Devon still don't know what that entails. And unless local people and local skills are involved in this system, it's not going to work, and we won't be able to have further relaxations without that system being in place. So lots of lessons to be learned, which I hope will help us address in future the gross public health inequalities in our country. Hi, Carol.
Thank you very much, Ben. Yeah, I would like to welcome Carol. Carol is Rob Hannaford's deputy, so the deputy leader of the Labour group on Devon County Council. I'll just let Carol log in and I'll go on with the next question. But welcome, Carol. So the next question has been a key topic in the media and in the public debate this week, and that's the wider reopening of schools. The SAGE committee has not modelled the proposed reopening, and the chief scientific advisor said on Friday that a clear and effective test and trace mechanism was necessary for schools opening, as Ben has recently said. I'd be interested in Ben's views on the potential of that happening by the 1st of June. And the independent SAGE group of scientists has also concluded that delaying by 2 weeks to the 15th of June would halve the risk to children. So I'll bring in the next question, which is Olivia Harker from Hevertree asks, I'd like to ask the panel what their feelings are about schools potentially opening on the 1st of June. And Zoe Burns in St Thomas asks, what are Ben and Phil's views on protecting all school staff, children, vulnerable parents? How can schools social distance and deal with staff fears? So I'm conscious that the responsibility for schools lies with Devon County Council in Exeter. So I'll bring Carol in if you can hear me, Carol, and you're ready. If not, I'll go to Ben and bring you in.
No, that's fine. I can hear you. Yes, it's an interesting question, and as you say, it's much in the media at the moment. I think it's a real concern. Devon County is at the moment following the government's guidelines and is preparing for opening on the 1st of June. My own feeling is that this is likely to be too early. I think there is widespread concern and fear, even though in Devon we are fortunate that the rate, the level of infection is lower than elsewhere. I personally suspect that the government will climb down and that it's going to be highly likely they will put that date back. Other than that, I would also reflect that I think there is widespread concern about the year groups they've chosen. I can see why they've chosen those year groups, because education for reception in year one is crucial, and children, particularly in more deprived situations, are falling further behind, and it's hard to catch up. But the concerns about social distancing for reception and year one are quite justified. And I suspect also, if they did press ahead with the 1st of June, a great many parents will not send their children to school. So my personal view is that the 1st of June is too optimistic.
Thank you, Carol. And of course, the joint education unions share that view and have, significant concerns. So, Ben in.
Yes, and I've been in regular touch with the education unions in Zoom conferences rather like this one. I completely agree with Carol. I mean, of course, everybody wants our children to go back to school, particularly given the impact that this is having on the most deprived families and their children in terms of their learning, but only when it's safe to do so. And my view is that the infection rate in the UK is still far too high, and we don't have the comprehensive test, trace and isolate system that we need to unlock further. And if you look at those countries that have reopened their schools or never closed their schools, like Sweden, with the exception of Sweden, they've all done so with far lower infection rates than the ones that we have, and with clear guidance for schools on social distancing and the resources to ensure that that social distancing can be properly practiced in schools. That's what we need in this country. And I'm afraid, like the whole of the rest of this crisis, as Phil was saying, it's been completely shambolic. The government's been making announcement after announcement that it hasn't been able to deliver. It's been announcing things without consulting with local government, or in this case, with the schools and the teaching representatives that want to try to make this work. And I think we're probably going to see our schools going back later than they otherwise would have done because of the shambolic government's approach to this.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, and this is a question about the role of trade unions in responding to the pandemic. And trade unions have obviously been at the forefront of fighting for adequate PPE, were key to establishing and extending the furlough arrangements, the key issue around sick pay and the fact that people who don't have sick pay from day one leading people to go into the workplace. And we've seen some pretty terrible consequences in the region that USDOR have highlighted. So Dave Cripshan from Exwick has a question in regards to this. He says that he welcomes the efforts of the Labour Party to really push this recently, and highlights that Unison in HE were not able to take action because of the anti-trade union legislation, and asks what are we doing to campaign against the anti-trade union legislation. And then he has a linked question in terms of Unison's fight to secure COVID relief funding for the HE so higher education sector, and refers to the announcement as being woefully inadequate. Will the government allow some universities to fail in the next few years? I'll bring Phil in first, and then maybe Ben wants to comment as well.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate the question from Dave, and many will know my background as being a former trade union official for over 40 years. I think there's never more an important time for people to join a union, and I'll leave you, Hannah, to tell us about the success of your membership recruitment. I think workers need to have a collective voice, and having that collective voice, they can ensure that individuals are heard. I can say from the City Council that we recognise Unison. We work with Unison. I've had a meeting this week with them. It is a bit strange for me, I have to say, sitting technically on the other side of the table when I was doing all the asking for 40 odd years. And I am reminded quite constantly by the chief executive of which side of the table I should be on in those discussions. Look, it's very important that we get these things right going forward, because I feel we may be into a period of them trying to deregulate the rights and conditions of workers even further on the basis of you're lucky to have a job. I think this is what's going to come back when people start returning to work, and people will start making a lot of choices around all of that. So people, please join your union. I see, Dave, some of those questions you ask are particularly directed at Unison themselves, and I feel sure and hopefully you've asked those questions. But I would always encourage people to join a trade union. They speak with one collective voice, and through that we can obviously make advances for workers. So that's very, very important. I hope that helps just a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Ben, I don't know if you want to comment on the funding relief for the higher education sector, and you may not know the details of Unison's campaign, but obviously they have been campaigning for an improved package. If you want to answer Dave's concerns about universities being left to fail.
Yeah, I mean, universities aren't the only sector that have been left high and dry. The aviation sector feel the same, and Labour's certainly been pushing for a more generous support package for the university sector, because it is being and will continue to be very hard hit, particularly if other universities follow Cambridge's lead. They announced this week that they're not going to be having any face-to-face teaching at all next term, and it'll all be virtual. I mean, why on earth would you want to, as a student, to spend all that money going to university if you're not having a normal university experience? But we'll keep pushing on that. I mean, on trade unions more generally, Dave, one of the good things to come out of this pandemic is there's been a huge surge in trade union membership. So we Labour MPs in the Southwest have been on regular conference calls during this crisis with all the senior representatives of Southwest trade unions. And on last week's call, we were told from every single union that following Boris Johnson's address to the nation, they had an unprecedented surge in membership. Which is not surprising, really. I mean, whenever I've had an email or a letter from a worried employee in Exeter, either about them being forced to work in unsafe conditions, or about the inadequate level of support for their particular industry or sector that the government is giving, the first thing I say in my email back is, please speak to or join a union if you're not already a member of it. And so another silver lining, I suppose, coming from this terrible crisis could be a boost in union membership. And also, to be fair to the government, some ministers, I mean, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak, for example, has been very careful at involving the TUC in his discussions around the furloughing scheme and some of the other measures the government has taken. And I think the government seems to understand that if not just in lockdown, but coming out of lockdown, to do so successfully, it's going to have to work with representatives of employees, not against them. and we'll wait and see whether that actually happens.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you. That's really helpful. And yeah, just in terms of my union, the National Education Union, the website just collapsed. It stopped functioning due to the scale of members that Sunday evening of people trying to join. And I know that all of the unions have had an increase in membership. And what's really positive as well is the age demographic. So, you know, significant numbers of people under 44, 70% in terms of NEU membership in the region. So that's have been under 44, so really positive. Okay, so the next question is on the arts, and I know this is certainly something that I'm missing, and I'm going to ask Carol to come in on this one. So Lizzie Bialyk in Pinho asks, the current climate has posed many problems to the plethora of industries. Understandably, those that offer more essential services will be phased back first and non-essential later on. Unfortunately, many people's livelihoods fall into non-essential. For people in the arts industry, this time is scary, with large theatres and companies having to close their doors. This leaves smaller businesses within the industry and community unsure what the future holds. Down the line, will there be any, or are there any actions in place to help revive the arts in and around Exeter? So, Carol, can I bring you in first on this?
Yes, although I would suggest that a lot of this is coming from the City Council. Rachel Sutton, I think, is the portfolio holder for culture and has probably got views on this, which Phil might be able to reflect on. But I think this is picking up on general concerns about a number of sectors which are deeply concerned in the West Country. You know, we have to think about our tourism industry and our hospitality industries generally. And I think everybody in those kind of sectors which involve the public and mass gatherings and close proximity are deeply concerned about the future. And the bottom line is that we just don't know at the moment when those sectors will be coming back into full operation. And certainly it's very likely that theatres and the entertainment industry and culture are going to be the hardest hit and some of the last to come back to normality. So I think it's absolutely right to be deeply concerned. And whether the government's support for workers in those industries will continue, be able to continue sufficiently long, well, there's just a huge question mark, and I'm afraid I don't have answers, and I'm not sure that anybody locally has the answers. But I'd be interested myself to know whether Phil and the City Council have any thoughts on this.
Thank you, Carol. Phil? Phil, I think you may be muted.
A couple of interesting facts for people to know before we came into COVID. Exeter had the third highest spend per population head in the country, and that's bigger than London per population and what we were doing in Exeter. We were only behind Cambridge and Middlesbrough. I haven't quite worked that one out, but we're behind those two on what we spend. We've got an excellent cultural offer here in Exeter, and last year we had a cultural program put in place. We've got supporting from Arts Council on a lot of this. We've got a lot of a national portfolio of funding where we have funding for the RAM, places like the Phoenix and some other theatre work groups that we've got in Exeter. We are supporting the Barnfield, although not part of the MPO. Our cultural offer is very important here in Exeter. We also had an appraisal that went to the January executive about the possibility of looking at a new entertainment venue for Exeter, and we had to be honest with ourselves. We weren't going to get that away on the remaining bus station site. We were looking at the Corn Exchange. There are some imaginative plans on how that could be developed to bring it up to 1,000-seater. I know there's this big argument about, should it be bigger than that? We have to look at, I'm not going to say the advice or the science on all of this, but we've had a lot of information on how we can bring this forward. Now, much of that will be put to a side for now while we get ourselves through the COVID crisis as a city council, because what we have to do is just survive this year. We've already had advanced funding on our national portfolios from the Arts Council, and I know the officers and Rachel are in further discussions about bringing some more funding forward. But one of the areas that I'm quite keen on, and I'm not forced, actually, I'm happy to be keen on, because the question comes from Lizzie, my daughter, and she certainly didn't tee me up for this one, who's quite passionate about amateur arts, and she works quite hard in the arts and performances. And there's a lot of enjoyment that people bring about doing amateur arts, semi-professional arts, and that mustn't get trampled over when we go forward. We are keen to do what we can as a city. We will. It's an important part of our life, which we mustn't forget. It's going to be part of our recovery plan. I get this feeling I am going to hear a lot more from Lizzie on what we should be doing as a council, and I'm always prepared to listen to that and to others. And I know Rachel is working, the portfolio holder, Rachel Sutton, is working very hard with the team to make sure that we maintain a cultural offer. And the last thing here is, Hannah, I'll just mention is, don't forget, we gained the UNESCO City of Literature status. That's a status that stays with us. One of the few in Europe. What we're doing down at the Custom House, and also with the Exeter Quay and Canal Trust, the offer there is quite amazing, to be quite honest. We've got to make sure that doesn't get trampled over.
Thank you, Phil. Ben, would you like to comment?
Just very briefly, as a former culture secretary when we had a Labour government, I mean, I'm a bit more optimistic about the future of arts and culture. If you look at what happened in the 1920s, after the First World War and the Spanish flu, then there was a huge flowering of arts and culture, very exciting developments. And we look at 1920s Berlin, for example, and the creativity that was unleashed there. And I think there's a lot of pent-up creativity at the moment. There's a lot of demand for content because content has been exhausted and people haven't been able to make content during the lockdown. So I think in some sectors, as soon as lockdown relaxes, you're going to see, the gaming industry, the film industry, TV, radio production, all getting up and running very quickly, because otherwise all they're going to have to show is repeats. I think it will be much tougher for the theatres and sort of mass public gatherings for a while, but I think even in Italy, they're talking about opening the theatres again this year. And museums in a lot of European countries are already reopening. So as long as we can, beat and then contain this virus, I don't see that there's any reason why, the culture, and I think there'll be a huge demand for these sorts of cultural experiences that bring people together and that people can have in common. I mean, just think of some of you've probably been enjoying some of these funny little video clips that have been doing the rounds during lockdown. It has prompted a kind of a new creativity in people, which I think when we're freer to do stuff will really flower and come out. And I mean, it will require government support, of course, but culture isn't just about government support. It's about what we do and what we choose to spend our time and money doing.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next question, which is a question from Laura Wright on students. I think, Ben, I'll bring you in on this firstly. So Laura asks, Are you aware of the situation that UK students are in, having to continue to pay for full rent for their accommodation, despite either no longer being there or, if they are, having a vastly reduced service? Are you also aware that students are being told to pay a full semester's rent upfront in some places for autumn 2020, despite not knowing if they will be able to return to their university? Is there something that can be done to negotiate with rental companies who run the purpose-built student accommodation to get a better deal for our students in Exeter and in the UK?
Thanks, Laura. It's a really important question, and this is probably the issue I've had more emails and contacts on from young constituents and from their families than any other. It's a varied picture. Some of the big student accommodation companies and the university itself have waived rents and fees because of the coronavirus. But a lot of the private rented sector accommodation that students live in Exeter is privately owned by relatively small owners who may own one or two properties. And it's very difficult to devise a way of forcing them to give up their rents. In some cases, these are people who've bought a little terrace house in Exeter because they don't have a pension, for example, and it's their pension. So we have lobbied the government on this, but the government is not prepared to intervene to make life any easier for students. And that's where we are. And we just have to keep the pressure on the university and the government to try to ensure the system is as fair as possible. But as I say, some of the companies actually, to give them their credit, have waived their rents. But it's very difficult, I think, to think of a way that you could just force other people who depend on the income to forego those rents when they depend on it. They depend on that as income as much as everybody else.
Thank you, Ben. The next question we have, and we've had loads on sustainable transport this week, as we did on the previous question time. And of course, this was on the front page of the Express and Echo as well on Thursday. We've had, I've picked two questions, as I say, out of a large number. And the first question is from Reverend Ross Maynard in Pennsylvania, who's the community minister at the South Street Baptist Church. Ross asks, the ecological impact of lockdown has been incredible. Lower CO2 levels, cleaner air, cleaner water. How can we build on this rather than going back to the normal? And then Rob Harding from Alphington asks, what has Devon County Council done to make sure that Exeter gets a fair share of the 250 million allocated by government for better cycling infrastructure? Will this money be allocated automatically, or do we need to apply? Should I bring Phil in? No, sorry, I'll bring Carol in because Devon County Council, the local transport authority. So I'll ask Carol to come in first.
Thanks, Hannah. Yes, this is absolutely a major issue, and one that as county councillors, the Labour group in Exeter is very much behind. In terms of Rob's question about the allocation of resources, I believe it's completely automatic, and there's nothing that the county is or needs to do in order to get its share. These calculations are generally made on the basis of the road mileage and the population and those kind of considerations. The plans to introduce various pop-up cycle routes and wide pavements in Exeter are going ahead. I find it slightly frustrating that they seem to be taking a few weeks to implement. We haven't actually seen them go in as yet, but I have been most involved with the one in Magdalen Road, and that is now a published plan, and I would expect that to go in very, very shortly. There are various other ones across the city that should be going in within the next few weeks, but I fully support what is also coming through, which is a genuine desire and wish to make changes that not only reflect the needs of the current crisis on social distancing and people not being able to use public transport, but actually lock into our transport system changes that shift very much the emphasis from private car use to more sustainable use. And both Phil and I and Ben took part in a Zoom meeting last week with Exeter City Futures and lots of concerned people across the city which were discussing this. And I think what came out of that was a suggestion, very strongly supported, that we should see more road closures within the city centre and a shift to keep the private car as much as possible out of our city centre and really grab hold of the opportunity and see this improvement in air quality that we've all benefited from. So, yes, excellent thinking and very much behind it. Just frustrated it's not happening as fast as we would all like.
Thank you, Carol. Phil, I think you did a video on this topic this week.
Yes, this has been in our minds for some time. We've been working with Exeter City Futures because, and this isn't getting at you, Carol, unlike the county, we have no resources for it. And we've been working with Exeter City Futures, and I think they've brought forward the net zero plan, which is available. It's on our website, as you know, on the Labour Party website, which is very important. The transport strategy is very, very key to all of that. And not that I have any interest in the sales of the Express and Echo. I would encourage people to have a look at the Express and Echo this week. There's quite a big article which involving my good self on some initial thoughts. What we would like to see as a city council, of course, is first of all, towards carbon neutrality. Transport is key. It's not just about cycling, it's about pedestrians, it's about rail, it's about bus, but I'm sorry to say it's also about the car, because I'm quite clear that we should be looking now at what I would say enlarging the city centre area to be car free. We just can't get out and paint some stencils on the road like some people would say we should do. We've actually got to do that in a coordinated way. I've already had emails back to me quite rightly saying, well, what about disabled people? How will they get in? So what we're suggesting is that we have to do this in two parts. There's the immediate, this funding we've had from government, which has gone to county council. They're meeting this week to talk about some of those proposals that was talked about at that very important meeting this week we've just had, Carol, with Carol and Ben and Rob. What we will then be saying is we need to take a strategic view on how we get to 2030 and what we need to do about cars. I think we've got to start talking about ending car usage in the city centre and the immediate surrounds. But what we have to do is to put alternatives in place. And that's what we want to work with the bus company. I'd like to see our bid going forward with the bus company and the county council for all electric buses through the city centre, okay? Giving people options. I was quite clear in my article, we are not going to get people from Oakhampton cycling in. That's why we need to get that rail net link back up over there, decent bus services. And I often quote places like Doddis-cum-Lee. People from Doddis-cum-Lee are not going to be cycling in to work in the morning. What we need to get those people in the outlying areas is to come in and to come to a park and share. A park and ride where they can catch electric buses into the city centre or nearabouts, where they can use bicycles to go to their workplace, electric bicycles, or even shared small car facility. We've got an extensive plan coming forward. We're having a review as a city council on our car parks. We get a major income from our car parks. We've got to start divesting ourselves of that. In other words, come off that drug. And we've got some imaginative plans which will be coming forward at the July executive that we will be working through our development company in order to put a few things right. For example, the Quay and Cathedral car park is temporarily shut because part of the roof is collapsing. We've got some plans for that, some very good plans, which I can't quite say yet, but they're going to be up and ready for the July meeting. And perhaps the next time we meet, I'll be able to tell you a bit more on how we can reduce carbon. And here's a clue. Carbon is produced in two major ways, one through transport, but the other big carbon problem is, of course, our home, where a large percentage of the carbon is produced. We have great ambitions. I've got Laura Wright, Councillor Wright, working on a retrofit programme for all our housing stock. That's 5,000 houses. Retrofitting, saving energy bills and carbon up to the tune of by 80 to 90%. We will also be looking at our own retrofit company, and those proposals are coming forward, a feasibility study to this executive in a couple days' time. That will hopefully look into a retrofit company that we could go into the private market. Can you just imagine the green infrastructure, the green jobs, working with the university, working with Exeter College, apprenticeships for people, retraining for people, jobs that can go on for the next 20 years, produced and built in and around the Exeter area to reduce carbon. So it's very important what we need to do with the county council, but I'm trying to enthuse people to say we have some very ambitious plans in the city council. But as I said at the start, Hannah, and I will end now, one of our key issues of the council, to be able to do all these, what I believe is marvellous projects, we've got to survive this year with our funding regime. And I know full well Ben will be there and other people shouting for local authorities to be able to deliver these imaginative programs, because I genuinely believe local government is the best way to deliver these things, not centrally bureaucratic people from Westminster controlling us. So it's very, very important. So we are moving on the program, and I'm sorry I've gone on a little bit, but I'm very enthusiastic about it, and we want to do a lot more working with the county council here in Exeter.
Thank you, Phil. It's very passionate. Can I bring Ben in? I know Ben wants to comment on this.
Yeah, just very briefly, Hannah. I mean, one of my frustrations of the last 23 plus years I've been the MP for Exeter is having a Labour City Council that's wanted to do this stuff, but doesn't hold the budgets or the policies to actually deliver it. They are held by the county council, which for all the time I've been the MP here has been conservative and hasn't really, if we're honest, been terribly serious or interested in this agenda. But also with a Conservative government that hasn't either. And when we had a Labour government, you may remember we had the cycling demonstration town city status in Exeter, which was one of the few periods when we've had a real progress in cycling and walking provision. But I detect there's been a real change. The webinar that Phil, Carol and I and about 50 or 100 others took part in last week had Tory county councillors on it. And I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised by their can-do attitude. They're obviously feeling the public pressure, but also the government guidance since we had the last one of these Zooms 2 weeks ago has changed. And the government's actually now saying to local authorities, if you don't do this, we will take the powers to force you to do it. So the county said, and they've made a clear promise now, the first schemes are going to happen on June the 1st, a bit like Boris Johnson's trace, track and isolate policy. So we have to hold them to that. But as well as securing these early wins, we've then got to build on that to embed that new can-do attitude in longer term policy and make sure that both the county council and the government continue to deliver on it. And then I think we can build a better future, a greener future out of all of this. Hannah, do you want me to say a little bit about schools and traffic around schools? Because there was a question specifically about that, which I feel very strongly about. I mean, if part of this, and Carol may have a view here as well, can be shutting off the approach to schools at school opening and closing times, that would be a huge bonus, because the idea that you're going to expect parents and kids, those who walk or cycle, to battle through, you know, traffic fumes and stationary traffic while some parents choose to drive their children to school is not one that I want to see in a post-COVID world. I didn't really want it beforehand, but we haven't really ever had the courage as policymakers to take those radical steps. But I hope that is going to be included in some of these plans going forward.
Thank you, Ben. So we've got one final question. I'm going to see whether I can answer it partly because it refers to the local CLP, and as the vice chair of the CLP, I may be able to help, but then I'll bring everyone in just for really brief comments. So the final question is from Maggie Young, and Maggie says, thank you for all the efforts of Exeter CLP and local Labour councillors who've been making the efforts that they've been making to keep us informed and involved. Have any of you any thoughts about how the Labour Party nationally and locally can enable members to take part in political discussions, make decisions and involve all members? In particular, Maggie saying to improve party democracy and engagement once the crisis is over, and how we can involve members who don't or can't attend meetings. So thank you, Maggie. That's a really good question. And hopefully everyone here is obviously aware of the question and answer sessions that we've been running on Zoom and via YouTube, but I would encourage you to send questions in and to let your friends and family know so that they can also watch. We've got a CLP blog that goes out from the CLP officers, so do read that. That includes really important updates from Rob, Phil and Ben. CLP website, big thanks to Duncan Wood for updating the website and keeping that looking good. There's been social events, so we've got the students have put on Zoom quizzes, we've got social media presence, you know, do follow your councillors and Ben, Phil and Rob. And of course the NEC are currently, so the National Executive Committee of the party are currently reviewing, you know, how the Labour Party is running our meetings, and you know, when we can possibly get back to a stage where we can have decision-making meetings, which is obviously essential for party democracy. So obviously the world's going to look different, and the Labour Party will obviously respond, and in many ways is leading the way in how we reach out and engage members. I'm conscious of time, so it's literally about 30 seconds each, but I'll ask Ben. Ben may have some more information about the NEC discussions, and then maybe one word from Phil and Carol.
Look, I think this is really exciting. We've all learned to work differently during COVID. I think these have been great because they give a wider access to the membership to question me and your council leadership. Keir did as I understand it, an all members Zoom Q&A in Cornwall for Cornish members this week, and I hope he'll do one for Devon soon. I mean, I think this does give access to members who can't make meetings. I would welcome us continuing doing these every so often, so that more members have the chance to question us on our work. And also, I would encourage everyone who hasn't already done so to respond to Charlie's email survey that he sent around, because you can make suggestions like that there, and you know, we could widen this to the wider community. It doesn't just have to be Labour Party members. Town hall meetings are really difficult physically because you tend to get the same old people coming along making the same old points, whereas if you have something like this which is compared as well as Hannah is doing it, you can keep it civilized, you can make it much more worthwhile. And so, you know, in terms of local accountability, I think it'd be a great thing to carry this forward into the future.
Thank you, Ben.
Hannah, I'll agree with Ben, and all I'll say, 3 words: organise, 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 and we'll be there.
Thank you, Phil. Carol, do you have any very brief comments?
Absolutely, thoroughly agree. It was on my mind. Let's keep these up. Perhaps have different portfolio holders available on different sessions. What is perhaps harder to think about is how to introduce debate for those members who are not able to attend meetings. That might be more difficult, but this is a perfect format for question and answer of the representatives. Keep it up.
Thank you very much, Carol. And we are just on the hour, so I'd just like to thank to Ben, Phil and Carol. Thank you so much for coming, answering those questions so effectively and succinctly as well, to enable us to get through them all. Thank you to Carol for joining us, and hopefully we'll see Rob at some point in the future. And just a big shout out to Stuart Henshaw.
Here.
Doing the IT again today. Stuart, thank you so much. You make this happen behind the scenes. And I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who's dialed in today to see us all, and do stay engaged. Look out for Charlie's email, and stay involved, stay active, and as Phil says, organise. Thank you very much.
Bye everybody. Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye.